Hi, I'm Scott Franklin, and thank you for joining me today with this presentation of the emotional side of change. In helping organizations successfully execute transformational change, the successful ones do two things very well. The first is that the leaders in the organization are active and visible throughout the change process. The second thing they do well is they effectively plan for and manage the people side of change, or more specifically what we're going to be discussing today, the emotional side of change. In his book, Managing Transitions, William Bridges was one of the first leaders in change theory to actively separate the change from the transition, where the change is the replacement of an existing combination of actions, behaviors, and beliefs, and replace them with a new set of actions, behaviors, and beliefs. The transition between the two, however, is the more complicated and less obvious process of having people give up or let go of the current known ways and then learning new and oftentimes uncomfortable behaviors. This transition occurs on an individual level and tends to be more of an emotional journey than a technical one. In their book Execution, Larry Bosty and Ram Charan observed that behaviors are beliefs turned into actions. Essentially, this means that any substantial change in behavior is integrated with a change in beliefs, and people don't change their beliefs easily. In fact, what we often see is that people hold on to their beliefs rather vigorously, and depending upon the type and size of the change, we'll need the appropriate amount of support to successfully make the transition. Change itself can be loosely categorized into two primary types, incremental change or step change. Incremental change can be either a series of small sequential changes or institutionalized as aggressive continuous improvement. Fundamentally, these are many smaller changes executed over an extended time frame. The other primary type of change is the step change, a large transformational change over a relatively short time frame followed by continuous improvement. From an emotional perspective, the major difference is that the large step change requires a leap of faith, or to let go of the old way in order to learn the new way. From a personal point of view, think of moving to a new city, having a baby, or a major promotion. The change probably happened on schedule and as expected, but this was the external situational change. The emotional transition to the point that you were comfortable with the new situation took a lot more time. From an organizational dynamics perspective, during change you're looking for more than basic understanding and acceptance of the change from the people. What you really want is commitment to the change and active engagement in the change itself. It is by managing the emotional side of the change effectively that you create this positive, active engagement. So what do we do with all this messy, soft stuff? Essentially, we understand the source of these emotions and then effectively manage the transition process so that the change is completed successfully. Understanding the psychology of change starts with the knowledge that a person's first reaction to an impending change is they are initially either for it, initially against it, or undecided. Think of a recent or current change that your organization has undergone or is undergoing. The more transformational, the better. What I want you to do is take 10 seconds and get that vision in your mind of the change. Okay? That you have that vision of the change in your mind. Now think of your initial emotional reaction when you first became aware of the change. And what we want to do is take a poll where we reflect on the recent or current change effort. How would you describe your emotional state at the beginning of the change? Would you consider yourself hopeful and excited, neutral and wary, or skeptical and resistant? So please, at the right, fill in what your initial response to the change was. And hit submit at the bottom when you're completed. Okay, we've got probably some pretty small participation. Can we reopen that poll? I don't think we can reopen it. Okay. This is actually much more exciting if we can get everybody to respond to the poll when possible. Let's see, what we see is that most were hopeful and excited, About 7% were neutral and wary, and about 7% were skeptical and resistant. Well, the fact that you're listening to this webinar means you're probably one of the early adopters. And what we've seen is from a change dynamic approach, we consider people as being in one of three groups. Group one is the early adopters or innovators. These are people that are usually excited about change happening. Group two is your silent majority, and group three are your resistors and critics. And what we've seen in a large organization is that it's a relatively consistent distribution of three groups in the ratio of 20, 50, 30. We see that 20% are the early adopters, innovators, and they tend to have mostly positive reactions to the change, while the remaining 80% tend to have mostly negative reactions to the change. And these include the compliant, which is the early majority and the late majority, and that generally shows up to be about 50%. And then the resistant group ends up about 30%. In a large organizational change, as it first comes out, that tends to be the response, the bell curve response that we get. The 20% early adopters, innovators, tend to have mostly positive reactions to the change, while the remaining 80% tend to have mostly negative reactions to the change. These reactions include fear, uncertainty, confusion, anxiety, hesitation, denial, anger, and oftentimes it shows itself in the behavior of doing nothing, of waiting, of standing by and waiting. The resistors may even be actively pushing against the change. The source of these negative reactions are based upon the fact the initial concern with most people when a change is coming is security-based, or what am I going to lose? Referring back to William Bridges' theory of change, that for people, any change begins with an ending, the giving up of the existing ways of doing things. Psychological research has shown that loss, any loss, triggers a grief cycle. This is the process of learning to give up the old way and move on to the new way. Psychologist Kubler-Ross created a grief cycle model to illustrate the range of emotions that are associated with adapting to a loss. As you can see, this can be an emotional roller coaster moving between passive to active to passive to active before resolving into acceptance. Understanding this model and that resistance to change is both natural and expected, we're better prepared to meet the needs of the organization during this transition time. In our experience of helping organizations through transformational change, we have seen that there are four major emotional steps or changes or stages during change, and successfully managing these stages reduces the resistance during the later stages. The first stage is the reason for change stage. People have difficulty committing to a change they don't understand, providing the organization with compelling reason for change, and this includes a reason that connects or at least makes sense, and understanding that the change is necessary and inevitable, and you start conveying the leadership commitment to the change. Properly done, the organization gains a sense of urgency. They'll also gain a sense of inevitability. So this change is coming, and that the organization is committed to this change. You start building that sense of leadership commitment. Looking for and building on any existing dissatisfaction with the current state, trying to find reasons for people to let the old ways go. And then you start the journey. What I'd like to take is another poll, and reflecting on a previous or current change, do you feel that the reason for the change was a 5 would be compelling and well communicated, and a 1 would be unclear or poorly communicated, and a 3 would be somewhere in the middle? So we'll take a minute to answer that poll for a change that your organization has been through or is currently in. Okay, as we can see, that we've got mostly in the 3 to 4 range. a few down in the 4%, down the 1 range of poorly communicated, a few 8%, a few up there in the compelling, well communicated, but kind of the typical bell curve, which is not unexpected. So that starts the journey. The second stage is a shared vision of the future. It is important that leaders have a clear vision of the future, but it is even more critical that the personal vision becomes a shared vision. The future is personal, and each person needs to understand their place in the future organization if we expect them to actively participate in the change. The creation of this shared vision begins with an understanding that there will be a single vision with multiple views. The result of effectively connecting everyone with the vision is that it aligns actions. The next thing is, besides aligning the actions so we know where we're going, it focuses the effort so we can work together. And ideally, it builds on a desire to change by creating a clear target. So thinking of that change that you had in your mind, let's go to the next poll and find out how well you felt your organization will handle that second step, the shared vision of the future. And was it a clear, personal, and well-communicated vision, or was it an unclear, impersonal, or poorly communicated vision? We'll start the poll now. Take about a minute. Okay, we see the results in, and we see a little less of a bell-shaped curve. The initial poll was much more bell-shaped. This one shows it more towards the lower end, that the vision of the future was either moderately or maybe not completely well communicated. So that takes us to step 3, managing the transition. Now this is actually a bigger step, takes longer, but it's got almost equal importance. Because if we fail at giving people compelling reason to change or shared vision of the future, they tend to resist the change much more. This next stage is the shared vision. And it is important that leaders have a clear vision of the future, but it is even Sorry, I'm talking about step 3, the managing the transition. This is where you connect people to the change process by providing them chances to be involved or with influencing the change. People want to have control and input on their future. By providing opportunities for people to be involved during the change, their resistance is inherently reduced. Usually not eliminated, but substantially reduced. Highly simplified, there are 3 major opportunities to create emotional engagement. The first one is in selecting the design team. By selecting a design team that's inclusive and covers all levels of the organization, not just senior levels, but gets to the hourly worker level, the broad-based, where it's across organizational bounds, major changes cross organizational bounds, and getting people to have input, getting a wider variety of people having input in that greatly increases the chance of that change being accepted. And then open to as many as possible. Some will be on the redesign team, some will be in the review team, some will be just in the information, but being as inclusive as possible. The second one is in designing the new processes. Once you've selected your design team, we look at designing the new processes. And through that design process, we come with frequent and open communications. So we can continue to communicate that things are happening. Many times the design process tends to be hidden from the organization and they don't know what's going on. And in well-run changes, the communications are more often, and it's open, frequent and open communications. An open review of the new design with the majority of employees so that people can look at it before it's imposed on them. They can look at it and have a chance to provide input. And then integrate feedback when possible. So as people see things in the change, they may not have been on the design team, but they still have valuable input. The third stage is the actual implementation. And providing training and coaching during the implementation process, and rewarding the behavior and results by giving frequent feedback. And you want to reward the attempts to do well, Their early attempts may not be completely successful, but they're making the effort. So you want to at least recognize the fact that people are making an effort for the change. And the last one is provide help and support. And one thing you want to do in this stage is monitor the frustration. As people are learning these new processes, the frustrations can start building in, and you want to keep them encouraged that they're not expected to be proficient immediately. So, so reflecting on a previous or current change, do you feel that the transition plan was inclusive, personal, and well communicated, or was it created in a vacuum where it was exclusive, impersonal, and poorly communicated? So we'll open the poll now, and please enter your answers. Where a 3 is roughly in the middle. Okay, we see the results of that poll. And again, we find it matches fairly well with the first one in that they tend more towards the lower end of the scale, that they feel that for some reason that it was tend more towards either in the middle or towards the lower end where the design was exclusive, impersonal, or poorly communicated. And that takes us to the fourth major stage of reinforcing the change. And that's the reinforcement. It's not just getting the new processes implemented or the acquisition complete or the merger of groups performed that completes the change. Is when the people affected are proficient and comfortable with the new ways. It's not uncommon to declare victory too early and forget that the new structure and or processes will still feel awkward. For example, think of moving your family to a new city. Even after the move is complete and the kids are in school, they still miss their best friends. The teachers are different. They fit in differently in sports, band, chorus. Your spouse's personal and professional connections are mostly left behind, and that includes any support system you had behind. So when you've made you've made the change, but the transition's not over. This is where another round of regret and frustration can begin. So be prepared for it and continue to manage the transition. In many cases, it takes a full 4 seasons to complete the transition, where very little effort is spent looking backwards. In an organizational change, the transition is reinforced through rewards and measures, key performance indicators and metrics, the policies and procedures are changed, set clear expectations for the change, and then consistent reinforcement. And this is a coaching supportive reinforcement, not a negative catch them in the act of doing it wrong. You really want to catch them in the act of doing it right, and that there's a reward for doing it right. And this is how we reinforce the change. We're going to take one other poll, and just reflecting on the change you had in your mind at the beginning of this. Reflecting on the previous or current change, do you feel the reinforcement of the change was, or 5 is very well reinforced, or number 1, or it's poorly reinforced? I'll open the poll. Have about 1 minute. Okay, we've got the results back, and kind of interesting is that nobody answered that the change was reinforced well. We still had that kind of bell curve where the majority were in the lower end of the scale. So reinforcement is a tough one because it's easy to declare victory too early and assume that since the change is over, the transition has been completed. What we kind of see from this is that maybe a sin that we're committing during our change processes is that we finish think the transition's finished while the change is finished. So as you are building the emotional connection to the change, you can assess your effectiveness by how easily your direct reports can explain the following. As you're communicating this change, if they're able to tell you why we're doing this, that you explain the reason, went back to the initial part where they see the compelling reason for change, and they also understand what the future look like. So what does the change look like, both now, the transition, and the future? They want to know what's in it for me plus. How am I going to benefit from this change? And it's easy to stop there, but the next question that they want answered is also, and it may go unasked, is what's in it for me minus? What do I lose from this? The mistake you often make is not answering that question ahead of time and letting some of the vocal resistors answer that question for them. And now you've got to go back and change their minds. So you want to plan for that question, that response early on. Let them know what they will be losing. In some cases, we've been in organizations that one of the losses is going to be the amount of overtime that's going to be available. And when you run into when you're in an organization where people have become dependent on their standard of living based on an expected amount of overtime, you think that taking it away is just a technical issue when you find out that it's really a lifestyle issue, and people can get very, very defensive on that. So you want to know ahead of time, or let them know ahead of time that this is coming. Let them plan for what the negative change is going to be. And the last one is making it clear, what do you expect of me? And you can have these questions either phrased like this or phrased in different ways. But most people going through a change want to know the answer to those 5 questions before they can really get supportive of the change. They're properly done, the process of actively discussing these topics with your direct reports allows you to get a better understanding of their emotional commitment to the change, plus any existing areas of concern or resistance. Knowing what concerns your people have allows you to better meet their needs during this transition. And our goal is to get everyone through the transition. Even if they started off negative or hesitant against it, these are still good people that need to be brought on and can continue to contribute to the company. Okay, and we'll take our final poll here. That reflecting on previous or current change, do you feel that the change would have been better executed by allocating more time and effort to one, and actually this is a multiple choice, one or more of these emotional stages? That more time in stage 1, the compelling reason to change, stage 2, the shared vision of the future, stage 3, managing the transition, or stage 4, reinforcement of the change. If you felt all the stages were handled well, you can answer the 4th one, which is NA. So we'll start that poll now. Okay, we take a look at the poll results, and then we see about a quarter of the people felt that a compelling reason for change would have improved the change effort. Then we've got a little more saying that the stage 2, sharing the vision of the future. Large number, the well-managed transition, that's a difficult one, and that is the act of change management, managing that transition from beginning to end. And one of the major mistakes made is the declaring the victory too soon. And that's the reinforcement of the change, the 4th one. We've got about 33% there at stage 4. And nobody said that all stages were managed well. So there's room for improvement. And hopefully this gives you a little more insight into how to prepare people emotionally for the change. They're going to go through these 3 steps. Now, they're not equal time and effort in them, but they're of equal importance. So creating emotional connections is what creates the commitment to the change. So we've looked through the key, next one. The emotional connection creates the commitment. We've looked at the 4 stages of change. The first one is the compelling reason for change, getting the people to understand that doing the same thing the same way is no longer an option. That no matter how great the change looks, that if people are happy with the current state, they tend to stay there. It's the classic on object at rest tends to stay at rest. It doesn't make them bad people. It's just that they're comfortable with what they're doing, and they haven't connected with why it changed. The next one is creating that shared vision of the future. And the critical part here is the shared part, not just an individual's view of the future or the leadership's view of the future, but a view of the future that everyone sees themselves fitting in with. The third one is managing the transition, that people go through the stages and they need help along the ways if you want to get everybody along. And if you're making it clear that you want everybody to be on board at the end of the change, they'll start putting greater trust in the management. And then the last one is, just because we've made the transition doesn't mean that the change is complete, that we have to reinforce it and provide support and provide our people with meet their needs during this transition, because they're going to go from something they're probably very proficient at to something that's new and uncomfortable. And I know when I'm trying to show somebody how to do a golf swing and I'm starting to get frustrated, I just grab a left-handed club and try swinging left-handed, and I realize what a beginner's going through. So just realize that this reinforcement and change, they may understand it technically, but they're not going to have the proficiency necessary for them to feel as comfortable with the change, with the new ways, as they were with the old ways. And to quote Michael Hammer, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. We can show people the new methods, we can teach them how to do it, but we've got to get in their minds and get their hearts behind the change and to become committed to the change. So that concludes the presentation today on the emotional side of change. I appreciate everybody joining. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. You can get me at easiest way is my email address, sfranklin@lce.com, or you can call the office. And as you close out this web session, we would greatly appreciate if you would participate in the short survey that will provide us with valuable feedback on both the content and quality of today's presentation. Thank you. I'm Scott Franklin, and appreciate you joining us today for a closer look at the emotional side of change.